Starbound separation. The pen hovered over the final signature line, a small black instrument that seemed to hold the weight of collapsing stars. Commander Theo Chen stared at the divorce papers, his astronaut's training failing to regulate his heartbeat as it should. Across the gleaming table, Dr. Aria Jensen sat with perfect posture, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but her eyes, those remarkable amber eyes that once looked at him with such wonder, now refused to meet his. "Commander Chen," the attorney prompted gently, "we need your signature to finalize the proceedings." Theo signed his name with the precision of someone accustomed to following protocols, even when they tore him apart inside. 3 years of marriage ended with a stroke of ink. 3 years of heated debates about stellar anomalies over breakfast, of tangled limbs on Sunday mornings, of shared dreams that had somehow diverged into separate trajectories. "All done," the attorney said, gathering the papers. "I'll file these today. You are both officially divorced." Aria nodded once, collecting her satchel as she stood. "I wish you a successful mission, Theo." So formal, so distant, as if she hadn't whispered his name against his neck countless times in their small apartment overlooking the space center. As if she hadn't once promised to love him across any distance, even interstellar ones. "Aria," he began, not knowing what he intended to say. An apology, a plea, a farewell? She paused at the door, her back to him, the sunlight from the hallway creating a halo effect around her slender form. "You've waited your entire life for this mission. Now nothing stands in your way." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than a launching rocket. 4 weeks later, Theo stood in the preparation chamber at Artemis Launch Facility, technicians buzzing around him as they performed final suit checks. Through the reinforced glass, he could see the massive Odysseus spacecraft that would carry him and 5 other crew members to Kepler-62f, an exoplanet 8 light-years distant that showed promising signs of conditions suitable for life. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Lin, the mission's medical officer, as she checked his biometric implant. "Focused," Theo corrected, though the truth was more complicated. The mission represented everything he'd worked toward since childhood. Humanity's first attempt to reach another potentially habitable world. 8 years in cryosleep, followed by a 3-year research mission, then another 8 years back to Earth. Nearly 2 decades of his life dedicated to this singular purpose. Yet as the final countdown approached, his thoughts kept drifting back to Aria, to the way their marriage had collapsed under the weight of his obsession with this mission and her equally intense dedication to her xenobotanical research. They had become 2 planets with diverging orbits, the gravitational force between them weakening until separation became inevitable. "Your heart rate's elevated," Dr. Lin noted with professional concern. "Pre-launch adrenaline," Theo lied. "I'll regulate it." Across the city in her laboratory at the International Botanical Research Center, Aria Jensen stared at the results displayed on her tablet, running the test for the 3rd time just to be certain. The confirmation remained unchanged. Pregnant approximately 6 weeks. She set the tablet down, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed them against the cool surface of her workstation. The timing was a cruel joke of the universe. For 3 years, she and Theo had discussed children as a distant possibility, something for after the mission or when the time was right. Now, 2 weeks after signing divorce papers and 2 weeks before Theo would enter cryosleep for nearly a decade, she carried his child. Through the laboratory window, Aria could see the distant silhouette of the launch facility, its towers reaching toward the sky like modern monuments to human ambition, the same ambition that had gradually pulled Theo away from her, transforming their passionate partnership into 2 separate lives that merely intersected at their apartment. "Dr. Jensen?" Her research assistant Maya appeared at the door. "The director wants to know if you've considered the position at Svalbard, the Arctic Research Station, a place as remote and isolated as Aria suddenly felt." "Tell him I'm still deciding," she replied, though in truth, the decision was crystallizing with each passing moment. That evening, Aria sat in her apartment now, watching the special news bulletin about tomorrow's historic launch. Theo appeared on screen, confident and charismatic as he explained the mission's objectives to an enthralled reporter. This was Commander Chen, hero of humanity's greatest journey. Not Theo, the man who once brought her coffee in bed and laughed at her terrible puns. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her abdomen. Should she tell him? The question had tormented her all day. What would it accomplish? Burden him with knowledge he could do nothing about? Force him to choose between his life's purpose and a child he wouldn't see for 19 years? Or worse, make him resent both her and the baby for complicating his carefully planned trajectory? No. This mission meant everything to Theo. She had seen how he came alive during training, how his eyes lit up when discussing the possibilities awaiting them on Kepler 62F. Telling him now would be selfish, a final attempt to tether him to Earth when he had always belonged among the stars. The next morning, Arya watched the launch from her laboratory, surrounded by colleagues who marveled at the historic moment. The massive rocket lifted off in a column of fire and thunder, carrying Theo and humanity's dreams into the void. As it diminished to a bright point against the blue sky, Arya made two promises to herself and the life growing within her. First, she would never stand in the way of Theo's destiny. She would raise their child alone, without burdening him with an obligation he couldn't fulfill from 8 light-years away. Second, she would create a life full of wonder and discovery for their child, even if it meant charting her own course to the most remote research station on Earth. 1 week later, Dr. Arya Jensen accepted the position at Svalbard Research Station, where the long polar nights mirrored the darkness of space and the isolated conditions would prepare her for a different kind of journey, one of single motherhood and scientific breakthrough, far from the spotlight that now followed Theo's mission across the galaxy. As her plane headed toward the Arctic Circle, Arya gazed out the window at the stars emerging in the darkening sky, wondering which distant point of light now carried Theo, already in cryosleep, dreaming perhaps of alien worlds while remaining unaware of the new life that had begun on the planet he left behind. Frozen worlds, 8 years passed like the blink of a cosmic eye. On Kepler 62F, Commander Theo Chen emerged from cryosleep, his body stiff but mind alert as the ship's systems gradually revived him. Through the viewport, he beheld an azure world streaked with violet, their destination finally reached after traveling 40 trillion kilometers. Beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Lin said, checking his vitals as the rest of the crew awakened. First humans to see this world with our own eyes. Theo nodded, mesmerized by the alien planet but fighting an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. Dreams during cryosleep were supposedly impossible, yet fragments lingered, echoes of Arya's laugh, phantom conversations they never had. As the team prepared for their first surface expedition, the ship's sensors detected something remarkable. Massive networks of plant-like organisms exhibiting complex communication patterns. These weren't just plants, they showed signs of collective consciousness, sharing information through biochemical signals that defied Earth biology. It's like they're talking to each other, marveled Dr. Okafor, the xenobiologist. Commander, we've found something extraordinary. Meanwhile, in the perpetual twilight of an Arctic winter, Arya Jensen watched her 7-year-old daughter Nova adjust the nutrient solution for her latest experiment. The girl's dark hair, so like her father's, was pulled back in a practical braid, and her small face wore the serious expression of a born scientist. Careful with the phosphorus levels, Arya cautioned, though the warning was unnecessary. Nova's intuitive understanding of plant biology had long since surpassed typical childhood abilities. They don't like too much, Nova agreed, referring to the bioluminescent specimens they'd cultivated in their specialized greenhouse. They're trying to tell us something, Mom. Arya smiled at her daughter's imagination, though part of her wondered if it was more than that. Nova had always demonstrated unusual sensitivity to the chemical signals plants use to communicate, often predicting changes in their behavior before instruments detected anything. The Svalbard Research Station had become their sanctuary. Among the small community of dedicated scientists, Nova had grown up surrounded by experiments and discovery, rather than typical childhood experiences. No one questioned Arya's single motherhood here. Research was what mattered, and in that, she had excelled. Her work on plant communication networks had gained recognition in scientific circles, inspired partly by observing Nova's unique connection to their specimens. She had built a respectable career and a loving home, even as she carefully avoided news about the Kepler mission that might reveal her daughter's parentage before Nova was ready to understand. That careful separation collapsed one snowy evening when Director Frost knocked on their door. "Mission Control is requesting you specifically," he said, holding out a tablet displaying an urgent communication. The Kepler team has discovered plant networks exhibiting communication patterns remarkably similar to your research. They need your expertise. Arya's heart stuttered as she scanned the message, seeing the familiar mission insignia and knowing Theo would be behind this discovery. When would they need me? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Immediately. They're sending transport tomorrow. Bring Nova. We'll arrange her education there. The director paused. This is unprecedented, Arya. What they've found could change everything we understand about life in the universe. After he left, Arya sank onto the couch, staring at the framed photo of Nova's 6th birthday, her daughter grinning beside a small greenhouse they'd built together. The secret she'd maintained for 8 years was about to unravel. Mom, Nova appeared in the doorway, curious. Are we going somewhere? Yes, Starlight, Arya said softly. We've been invited to help with a very important mission. About the space plants? Nova asked, her eyes lighting up with excitement. The ones the astronauts found? Arya nodded, wondering how much her perceptive daughter already sensed about the connection that stretched across light years, binding their small family together despite time, space, and secrets. Signal breach. Mission Control buzzed with unprecedented activity as scientists analyzed the streams of data flowing from Kepler 62F. Arya moved through this organized chaos with practiced calm, though her heart raced each time Commander Chen's voice came through the transmission delays. Nova, endlessly curious, absorbed everything around her, quickly becoming a favorite among the scientists with her insightful questions. Arya had managed 3 days without directly exposing Nova to Theo's image, but knew the inevitable confrontation approached with each passing hour. In the habitat module on Kepler, Theo's team faced mounting problems. The planet's flora had begun interfering with their equipment, communication systems faltered, and 2 crew members reported unusual symptoms after collecting specimens. The plant network seemed to be responding to our presence, Theo reported during the daily briefing. Almost like an immune system reacting to foreign bodies, Dr. Okafor appeared in the frame, visibly concerned. We need Dr. Jensen's input on these biochemical patterns. They're unlike anything in our database. Arya was summoned to the primary communication hub, bringing Nova along rather than leaving her with the education coordinator. As they entered, the main screen displayed a life-sized transmission of Theo, his commander's uniform now worn with the ease of someone who had grown into his authority. Nova froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the man on screen. Arya watched her daughter's face, recognizing the moment of recognition, not memory but something deeper, more instinctual. Nova was seeing her own features reflected back at her from across the stars. Dr. Jensen, Theo acknowledged formally, then stopped mid-sentence as his gaze shifted to the child beside her. The silence stretched across light years as understanding dawned in his eyes. We need to discuss the molecular structure of the communication nodes, Arya interjected professionally, trying to redirect the moment. But it was too late. Mom, Nova whispered urgently, tugging at Arya's sleeve. He looks like me. The transmission delay saved Arya from immediate response, but when Theo's reaction came through, his voice was carefully controlled. Dr. Jensen, I request a private channel when possible. Later that night, after settling Nova to sleep with promises of honest conversations tomorrow, Arya initiated the secure channel. Theo's face appeared unguarded in a way she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. How old is she? He asked without preamble. 7, Arya answered, the single word carrying the weight of years of silence. My daughter. Not a question. Yes. The rage and pain she expected flickered across his face, but something else too, a hunger to know, to understand. Why didn't you tell me? You were leaving for 20 years, Theo. What would it have accomplished except to burden you with an impossible choice? That wasn't your decision to make, he said, his voice tight. It was the only decision I could make, Arya countered. For all of us. Their confrontation paused abruptly as alarms sounded on Theo's end. Emergency lights flashed behind him. We're losing containment on the specimens, he reported tersely. I have to go. But this conversation isn't finished, Arya. The next morning brought crisis. All communication with the Kepler team had ceased. The plant life had completely overwhelmed their systems, creating an impenetrable biochemical barrier. During the frantic strategy session that followed, Nova slipped away to the research greenhouse where Earth specimens related to the Kepler flora were kept. When Arya found her there an hour later, Nova was sitting cross-legged among the plants, eyes closed, utterly still. "They're scared," Nova said without opening her eyes. "The plants on Kepler. They think our people are attacking them." "How could you possibly know that?" Arya asked, scientific skepticism warring with maternal intuition. Nova opened her eyes, which seemed to reflect starlight despite the artificial lighting. "I can feel them, Mom, through these plants. They're all connected, even across space." Before Arya could respond, an alert sounded. A weak signal had broken through from Kepler, carrying a fragmented message from Theo. "Plant consciousness, symbiotic relationship, need Jensen's protocols." Arya looked from the message to her daughter, suddenly understanding what might be possible. The connection she'd spent 8 years hiding might now be their only hope: quantum entanglement. "It's theoretically impossible," protested the mission director, glaring at Arya across the conference table. "Plant communication networks cannot span interstellar distances." "And yet," Arya replied calmly, "my daughter sensed the exact biochemical pattern the Kepler flora are using before we received Commander Chen's fragmented transmission." Nova sat beside her mother, solemn but unafraid as the assembled scientists debated her unprecedented abilities. Since the discovery of her connection to the alien plant networks, she had become both miracle and mystery to the team. "We need to establish whether this is genuine xenobotanical communication or—" The director trailed off, unwilling to accuse a child of fabrication. "Test me," Nova said simply. The tests confirmed what Arya already knew. Nova could somehow bridge the gap between Earth's plants and their distant evolutionary cousins on Kepler, functioning as a living translator between two worlds. When they re-established limited contact with Theo's team, he appeared haggard but determined. After delivering his official report, he requested another private channel with Arya and, this time, Nova. The girl stared at the screen, finally meeting her father's eyes across impossible distance. "You have your mother's intellect," Theo said softly, "and my stubbornness, apparently." Nova nodded seriously. "And your eyes. Mom kept your picture in her research journal." Arya felt heat rise to her face. "It's okay," Theo interrupted, his expression softening. "I'm glad she knew something about me." The formal barriers between them cracked further as Nova explained her understanding of the Kepler flora's reactions. "They're a collective consciousness," she said with a child's straightforward clarity. "They think you're invading their network when you take samples. You need to ask permission first." Over the following days, they developed a protocol based on Nova's intuitive understanding. Theo's team would use modified versions of Arya's research to establish non-invasive communication with the plant networks. During one late transmission, after Nova had gone to sleep, Theo confronted the question that had hung between them. "Why did you really keep her from me, Arya? Was it punishment for choosing the mission?" Arya shook her head. "I kept her from you because I knew you, Theo. Known the way you'd sacrifice everything for your sense of duty. You would have postponed the mission, or worse, resented us both for forcing you to choose. You had no right." "I gave her stability instead of a father who existed only in transmissions," Arya interrupted. "I gave you freedom instead of guilt. Was I wrong?" The silence stretched between them, amplified by the vastness of space. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "But I do know I've missed everything that matters." Her first words, first steps. "I'm a stranger to my own daughter. She's extraordinary, Theo, and she needs you now, we all do." For the first time in years, they looked at each other not as ex-spouses or colleagues, but as parents of a remarkable child who had somehow bridged worlds they thought permanently separated. Gravitational return. 2 years later, the Kepler mission approached its scheduled conclusion. Through Nova's unique abilities and Arya's adapted protocols, Theo's team had established a revolutionary understanding with the sentient plant networks, opening diplomatic rather than merely scientific relations with the first confirmed extraterrestrial intelligence. Arya and Nova had remained at mission control, their lives now inextricably linked to both Earth's scientific community and the distant expedition. Through regular transmissions, Nova had developed a relationship with the father she had never physically met, sharing stories, questions, and eventually a deep connection, despite the light years between them. During the final mission briefing, Theo made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the program. "I am requesting reassignment from Phase 2 exploration to the return mission," he stated formally. "Personal considerations necessitate my return to Earth rather than continuing to the secondary Kepler sites." The implications were clear to everyone who had witnessed the extraordinary family reunion unfolding across space. Commander Chen was choosing to return to the daughter he'd never held, and the woman he'd never stopped loving, even if it meant giving up the next phase of exploration he had once prioritized above all else. During the 8-year return journey, as Theo slept in cryostasis, life continued on Earth. Nova grew from a curious child into a brilliant teenager, her unique abilities leading to the creation of a new scientific discipline, integrating xenobotany with interstellar communication. Arya watched their daughter blossom, increasingly aware that Nova had inherited not just Theo's eyes and her own intellect, but something entirely her own, a capacity to bridge worlds that neither parent had imagined possible. On a crisp autumn morning, 17 years after their divorce, Arya stood with Nova at the landing facility. The Odysseus spacecraft made its final approach, carrying home the explorers who had changed humanity's understanding of the cosmos. Nova fidgeted with nervous energy. "What if he doesn't like who I've become?" "Impossible," Arya assured her. "He's known you through transmissions for years. He loves you exactly as you are." When the entry ramp descended and the crew emerged to cheering crowds, Theo appeared last, older, his dark hair now threaded with silver, but his eyes exactly as Arya remembered. His gaze found them immediately. Time seemed suspended as he crossed the distance, hesitating just before reaching them. Nova moved first, closing the final gap and embracing the father she had known only through light and sound across astronomical distances. Theo's arms encircled her, his eyes closing briefly as he held his daughter for the first time. When he looked up, Arya found herself meeting his gaze directly, without transmissions or light years between them. "You were right," he said quietly, "about so many things. But also wrong about one important thing." "What's that?" she asked. "That I couldn't have both, the stars and a family." He reached out his hand, not demanding, simply offering. Some orbits separate only to align again later. Arya took his offered hand, feeling the warmth of actual touch replace years of distance. That evening, on the observation deck overlooking the launch facility where their journey had begun, Theo, Arya, and Nova stood together watching distant stars emerge against the darkening sky. "Which one is Kepler?" Nova asked, though she knew the answer. Theo pointed to a faint blue point of light. "There, our second home. And now?" Arya asked the question that had remained unspoken between them. Theo looked at her, then at their daughter. "Now we discover what's possible here on Earth. Together." As Nova moved away to use the telescope, Theo's fingers intertwined with Arya's, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest exploration wasn't of distant planets, but of the connections that survived time, space, and even the echoes of past mistakes. They had lived separate lives across frozen worlds, both literal and emotional, but found their way back to the warmth of understanding that perhaps love, like light, could indeed traverse any distance if given enough time to reach its destination.